All right, let's get started. So I think other people may come in, but for now, we're doing our second session on this book, Parmenides, which is from section 4 or whatever to the end of part 1. So we're getting through the various alternatives to various opposites of aletheia other than pseudos, and then what all Heidegger reads into all that. And then we're building up to the discussion of Plato's concluding myth in the Republic, the myth of about the plane of lethe in the afterlife, and everything that Heidegger says about that. So that's fundamentally the way we're on. I want to mention a couple things about what we're doing next. First of all, the next session, I'm planning to have in only 3 weeks. That's the 6th of July, 3 weeks from today. I've got some travel after that, so it would have to be delayed if we didn't manage to get it in then. There's only about 30 pages left in the book, so I think 3 weeks is sufficient. People should have the book, etc. And the reading is very simple. It's just to the end of the book. That's one, and we'll also discuss wrapping up next time. In addition, often we talk about what we might do after that when we're finishing the book. I think the plan is to continue with something in basic writings. We're going to do a famous essay on the origin of the work of art, and we'll split that over a couple of sessions. Just a second, I have to let someone else in. Yeah, okay. I was going to say the next. Welcome, Jason. The next reading we're going to do after we finish the book, this book that is Origin of the Work of Art from Basic Writings. Part of the idea there is that some of the same discussions of truth as disclosure that are thematic in Parmenides are also talked about there, as well as he talks about this world and earth kind of structure that we saw a fair amount of in contributions, and that is also being, I would say, ties into some of the lethe, aletheia stuff being talked about here. Although Origin of the Work of Art is considerably earlier than this in time. I think it's 1935, if I'm not mistaken. But the idea is to do that over a couple of sessions. So in terms of having the book, if you already have basic writings, you have it. If you want to find a copy of it in PDF or something like that, that will also work fine. But we're going to plan to split that into two sessions. It's about 80 pages, counting the postscript and addendum and so forth. So we'll split it into two sessions, about 40 pages each. Haven't picked the time for that yet, but it'll probably be at the very beginning of August or sometime in early August. Okay, so that's just some of the administrative out of the way for the plans for next readings. I want to get to round robins of reactions to our reading here, and things that you want to make sure that we cover when we get to the discussion of things. Pete, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, sure. I read the pages and I was hoping to get back to it. I finished it 2 weeks ago and I was hoping to get back to it. But I've been traveling, I've been sick, so uh, I haven't had that opportunity. I like there's the field of Aletheia and the field of lethe. And that seems to add some structure to the being with a Y or the clearing. Uh, there was a lot here that tickled my fancy. The oblivion, uh, and I was also always thinking of how does presence fit in with this? Because it comes up in various points throughout the pages we read. He keeps returning to presence, and is presence being itself, or is it physis? I'm not quite sure. That's one of the things I wanted to return to, get a better handle on presence and how it fits in with Aletheia. Uh, and that's what I can remember.
Okay. Okay, we'll definitely try to cover those things. Oblivion, especially, I think it's not just an interpretation of lethe. He also does quite a bit with it. He's thinking about it not just in terms of the meaning of a word or an occurrence that can befall us, but also in terms of something that is happening in the history of the West, in the sense that the contact with something like original mythos is going away. That's a paradigm case of the kind of oblivion he's worried about. So we can tie that to the stuff that was in the whole big structure in contributions at some point. I think that's definitely here. Okay, so those are definitely things to talk about. Dan?
Yeah, I read the section. Actually, I finished it right before the meeting, and I really like it. I think it's quite dense, and he says a lot there. And this is kind of like, to me, it's the core of Heidegger. What Heidegger is this aletheia, lethe tension, and probably connected with what Pete said. It's this connection also with presence, with physis, and with, I really like this kind of thing with how we kind of certitude moves into to kind of we try to grasp and fix things, and what are the problems with this. And he mentions techne again there, like instruments, the certitude for the sake of certitude, and he ties that with modernity and his entire project. And of course, let's see what else. uh well, I probably that's my first reaction. I actually, one more thing, like with Plato, his Republic, it's very interesting how he shows new aspects of that thing that I read that probably thing a few times, and I read this book before, but still new things show up, and he has this kind of ability to show new things, that where you look before you saw something, and then he said no, there is even more, and I really like that. That's it for now.
I've definitely got tons to say about his reading of the Republic, so we'll definitely get to that. I do think some of the stuff on the plane of lethe reading is good. There's other things going on here in the contact with Plato. You mentioned some of the contrasts with modernity. He has these sprinkled throughout, references to Descartes, references to Nietzsche and Spengler in various places. Several of these, and often it's just contrast, but he definitely is. There is a stark contrast between the modern thinkers, including the modern people who think they're engaged in something like a modern reception of the Greeks, like Nietzsche and Spengler, and the appreciation of the Greeks you're getting here from Heidegger. He doesn't think that that a Nietzsche Spengler interpretation of the Greeks has the Greeks, something like that. So we definitely want to talk about that.
Well, one more thing. I think I really, maybe we can touch on this idea of sight and how that sight moves into light and looking and idea and all that Platonic stuff, and how they try to fix the unconcealment in that, like related to presence, and how they try to fix it, and what Heidegger thinks is started the entire problem since then.
We're definitely going to talk about looking and how much looking is underplayed here. He does talk about looking an idea here, and relatively sympathetically compared to other places that he talks about it. And he also allows that the Thea and Aletheia is seeing, right? And that seeing and that or seen at least, and the goddess are the same word. He even insists there's no diacritical marks in Greek, so we don't care that it's a different E, right? So definitely have to talk about that. But from my point of view, he is definitely emphasizing the connection of the revealing of these things to language more than just something like Thea as vision or as intellectual intuition or something like that. And we have to talk about that contrast. Okay. James, want to give first reactions?
Well, I'm interested, and I'm excited to read it. Most of it seems to flow over me like water off the back of a duck. but for whatever reason, I expect that to happen and I don't object. I feel that for me, there's something therapeutic about it. And it's especially therapeutic to come in here and listen to comments of people that understand it better than I do, and to realize that there are things out there that can develop for me by reading more and by listening here.
Were there any particular things that were tip of your tongue mysterious that you wanted us to go over or explicate?
I don't think so. I'm a little enthusiastic, and I finished the book, and I'm also listening to your series of Heidegger on Nietzsche,
Mm-hmm.
reading mindfulness. So I'm kind of, my cup overflows quite a bit. I'm happy that it does. But no, I wasn't struck by anything specifically. I mean, I was emotionally a little bit overpowered by the poem itself.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, it's from we read that very early on, and it's
Mm-hmm.
still the most prominent thing
Mm-hmm.
in the reading for me.
Mm-hmm.
Is the
Yeah, and Parmenides himself is definitely moving and deep, both. If I had a criticism of this course as someone taking it, it would be, I wish he spent more time on the Parmenides poem, but as opposed to just the Greek words that occur in the Parmenides poem. But sure, that's partly the difficulty of depth when you have to put together all the pieces. Okay, Jason, do you want to have any comments? First reactions?
Yeah, I was wondering about the concept of destruction. I've always assumed it had some kind of quality of unconcealment. And he's saying it's concealment. So I don't know if this is his typical view, or is he going to change his mind? Because it seems to me that he kind of takes it both directions.
So he definitely is giving several positive spins on concealment along the course of the whole thing. But he also, when he talks about the Roman bastion of veritas standing in the way of our understanding of Aletheia, right? He presents that as this. He calls it a bastion, and he says that it is occluding our view of Aletheia, like it's a there's an eclipse going on. Of the thing we're trying to see is sitting behind this big Roman bastion, right, made out of rock. In the lower layers of which Aletheia is interred. So on the at least on that image, the destruction of trying to understand the elements of the tradition down to their foundation stones or something like that would involve something like a destruction of that structure that's standing in the way of our understanding of Aletheia. But that is mostly an attempt to unveil Aletheia, not to veil it. So you're right that there are places along the way where he has this seemingly positive take on concealment. First of all, he wants to point out that there is something like a heart of concealment in the notion of truth itself, if we can put it that way. He says toward the end that the revelations of Aletheia and Physis come from they originate from the concealment on the plane of lethe, something like that, right? But that is an attempt to reveal something about a experience or structure that he sees in the Greeks that, yes, it is also talking about things which are concealed, but he's trying to reveal it. That at least is the main way I read it. There are some earlier sections where he talks about mystery and relation to mystery, again, with this positive sense on concealment. On concealment. Sometimes concealment is not dissembling, it is sheltering. That's the thing, that's the word he uses several times. And there is certainly some notion of sheltering in some of the Greek stuff we talked about here. And there certainly is the notion that there are ways far from man or far from the usual paths of men that reveal things which are not revealed on the usual ways. That's there in the Parmenides poem, for example, and it's Heidegger refers to it again when he talks about the mystery or the secret as the rare, the path of the rare, something like that. I would say, though, that from my point of view, most of the most positive spins on concealment you're hearing here are primarily coming from Heidegger himself, rather than from Parmenides or Plato, for example. There is definitely an experience of unconcealment as an out of which and a back into and a between, something like that, in both the Greek myth that Plato is referring to and in Plato himself. But if you read the whole Republic, there's definitely not just one myth, but multiple myths going on about the relationship between concealment and unconcealment, and Plato is unambiguously on the side of unconcealment in all of it.
Right.
So I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
Because I thought I was the only one noticing the problem that he's setting up.
He definitely is setting up something as there being something positive about concealment itself, and some of that is more from him than the people he's citing.
Okay.
And some of that may come back in our both in the next reading for the last section, and also in the Origin Work of Art reading after this about something like a veiling or sheltering as a place from which unveiling originates, something like that. Okay, we've gotten through a round of round robins. I don't know if we have enough things to talk about. I'm joking. So just want to briefly sketch the way I want to go over, and people can feel free to jump in and add other things. But I want to first just talk about the different alternatives to pseudos. That is, pseudos as false, as opposites of aletheia. That's some of the stuff early in our reading. I want to talk about forgetting and oblivion, and especially that related to oblivion of being or eclipse of aletheia, or eclipse of mythos as he presents it. And then I want to talk about the plane of lethe, the myth of Plato here, the interpretation of that we're getting from Heidegger of Plato's experience of aletheia. I think we're getting more of that than a experience of Parmenides' experience of aletheia. We're getting a Plato's experience of aletheia, and maybe also a Hesiod's experience of aletheia, or maybe not of aletheia, maybe of lethe. But anyway, the third part, lots of stuff about what is going on with Plato here. Okay, that's just brief outline. The first and easiest part is about all the different, I don't know if it's easiest. The first part is about all the alternatives to pseudos as false. We think of true and false as simple opposites, and there's only that one opposition. Aletheia is already pointing to, as disclosure is already pointing to something like there can be another opposite of truth as unconcealment, which is concealment. And concealment doesn't have to be falsity. There's all other senses of concealment. So that's one of the main things here. We talk about how some of those take on this sort of positive note, but he also covers several other negative notes, but they're different from false as pseudos. And I want to make sure that I realize some of these things are happening in Greek and they're Greek concepts, and it may be hard to follow all of it. But the one he spends the time on at the beginning of our reading is atope, or being off the path, basically, being led astray. We would say misleading, or what is misleading? One of the opposites of the true is the misleading, or to be misled or to be off the path. And he points out that the path that you're off of is the same path that's referred to in method, which is a methothos. So there's the way that leads to truth, the way that leads to unconcealment, and whatever it takes you off that way is another opposite of unconcealment. So, and he's connecting that notion of off the path as an alternative to pseudos. So it's not something fake; it's something that is he calls it a byway or a diversement or a distraction, something like that. But he is also using that to emphasize the fact that Parmenides himself at the beginning of the poem is talking about what the way to the goddess, right? He's taken away on the way to the goddess. Heidegger spends less time talking about the fact that in the goddess's actual teachings in Parmenides, there's multiple ways too. There's the divine way, the mortal way, and the way of the altogether not. And he doesn't bring up any of those here, which he easily could have when he's talking about the different ways. But he does bring up the way to the goddess and what it reveals about the goddess, what it reveals about Aletheia, that how the way to the goddess is characterized. Did anyone have any? I want to give people a chance to remember if they had any particular reactions to the way to the goddess part. Some of that is the part of the poem before the part he quoted at the beginning. I don't know if people looked at the whole Parmenides poem, but what are the characteristic things that happen on the way to the goddess that might be referred to here as what's distinctive about this way? Where is the temple of this Thea?
At the end of the path.
It's at a doorway. It's at the doorways of night and day. So you have a where day meets night is where the goddess Thea is found. And there were several daughters of the sun along the way. And the dawn is one of the daughters of the sun, and the dawn is the daughter of the sun at the meeting of night and day, right? So there's this image of night and day as concealment and unconcealment. Dawn is the point of transition between them, and we are brought along the way to by the steeds that are drawing the chariot of the sun to the edge of the dawn, which is on the borderline of night and day, right? So we're already getting this fundamental mythic version of day-night dichotomy as something like truth concealment dichotomy. And Heidegger mentions here that night is one of the key opposition words here. One of the key notes that in Hesiod in the mythic background is the term that corresponds to lethe, right? Who is it? Not Pender, the other guy. Yeah, Hesiod. Yeah. Lethe is one of the daughters of night, right, alongside strife, or maybe she's one of the daughters of strife, but strife is herself one of the daughters of night. So Lethe is a granddaughter of night, right? So there's and partly because theogony is all about trying to trace these things back in lineage trees to more core concepts, right? Day and night become core concepts that things like strife and want hang off of the night, and lethe or oblivion or forgetting is one of the daughters or granddaughters of night. Okay, so we're not going on a way to the day. You could be going on a way to the day, but instead we're going on a way to the dawn, which is the point of transition between day and night. That we're not just being drawn by daughters. Yes, daughters of the sun are receiving us, and the goddess, but night is not put out of the picture. If you get me, the contrast with night is part of the picture, and I think that Heidegger is just right on that sort of mythic background of Aletheia. And by the way, that structure is older than the Greeks, right? It's deep in the Greeks. You get the same thing in Egyptian or Sumerian cosmologies, right? So this is something which is an older inheritance of civilization, if you get me, of mythic background. Okay. Yes, so sorry, Lethe is the daughter of Eris. Eris is the daughter of night, right? So the granddaughter of granddaughter of night. Okay, why Eris? And what are the? And there's another one. Absence, not hunger, limon, and suffering the cheerful. Right, all of these are a something. Right. There's the Aletheia, and there's the amon, which is basically it's kind of an absence of substance, but it's specifically an absence of sustenance, absence of food, right? And the suffering is almost a being without the earth. The word itself has the same root, Gaia, as the word for earth, that you're being deprived of. And that's a word that also in Greek can mean exile. Deprived of a home is to be deprived of earth. Okay. Why don't I bring this up? So the positive sides of all those deprivations, right, would no longer be the daughters of strife, and therefore of night. And they would be having a place or home on earth, having sustenance or food, and having dea, having sight or being seen. So the aletheia is here something like a not unseen, but the lethe, that is the deprivation of it, is a forgetfulness or oblivion that is a fallen into the unseen, something like that. Okay, first of all, before we get into the oblivion structure itself, any reactions to this on the level of the mythic contrasts to aletheia, the other things that truth could be contrasted with besides the false?
So if I remember correctly, Aletheia is truth. She's not the goddess of truth.
Yes.
While Erin is the goddess of strife. And
yes, Eris is the goddess of strife. But the only thing we're told about the goddess here by Parmenides himself is the name Theia, which just means goddess. It's the THE root with a singular feminine, nominative. That's it. So just the goddess. And the fact that this goddess is the goddess truth, that is Heidegger's gloss. The only thing that we're told by Parmenides himself is that this is the goddess who is at the who you find at the doorway of day and night, right? So someone who is too Hesiod, not enough of a philosopher and too much committed to Hesiod, might think that this goddess is Dawn, right? Who was also one of the daughters of the sun. Just as Eris is one of the daughters of the night. There's a goddess Dawn that's the daughter of the sun. I don't think I think the philosophical reading is better, but I'm just saying that the mythic structures reveal a lot, but they also they have their own simplicity in order to be composed in a way that is readily followable by the imagination and readily related to, right? Okay.
Yeah, and you could also, relating to the first beginning, the other beginning, here we're talking about the first beginning.
Yes.
And there's this contrast between night and day being visible.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that later with the other beginning, it's going to be, instead of having the visual metaphor, it's going to be openness versus closedness.
Yes.
Because he doesn't want to
definitely
say
related.
blind people don't have access to being.
Yes. there's no question that that visible and light here are being used in a metaphorical way, in a mythological way, right? And that they mean more than that. They mean more like sight with the mind. Even in Plato's Republic, right? He has the son of the good, which is has a whole light metaphysics attached to it. And what does it do? It makes things be intelligible, right? It doesn't make them be visible. That's what happens. The sun in the visible world makes things visible. It gives the light without which, even if the eye could see and the thing could be seen, the vision itself could not take place, right? Because you need the light that yokes them together, that is the between, right? And that same structure Plato wants the good to do in the intelligible realm. So the intelligible seeing is something like truth that requires not only a mind that can see and a truth that can be seen, but some good yoking them together. That's the light metaphysics that you get in the Republic from Plato. How close is that light to the open? We had this discussion in the Essence of Truth thing when we got to Heidegger's interpretation there. It's pretty close. I do think that open may be, come this way, less metaphorical, more philosophically exact as to this is all you need for the theorem to go through. But the idea that there is a some shared structure that the understood and understanding require to bring them together, to allow them to be turned towards one another, is the same structure in both of them. And that is the structure that Heidegger calls the open in his own view, and that Plato is, on a visual analogy, is calling the yoke of the light, bringing the two together, and uses that word yoke as the thing that combines them. Okay. There's another thing going on here, which is Heidegger, while telling us all these things about the structure of meaning of concealment, meaning of light, is doing all of it in terms of quotations from Hesiod and subtle word meanings in Greek. And he tells us that all of this is things which the words say. And then he points out that word in Greek happens 3 different ways. So do people remember the 3 ways, the 3 different Greek words for word that he's using here? And what the distinctions might be between them?
There's logos.
Logos is the 3rd.
And one is, the root is seed, or maybe I'm thinking of something else. Sema.
No, that's sign, and that's the semantic or the sign he mentions separately, but that's not the word. Now the 3 words for word are logos, epos, which is the thing said, right? The spoken word as the thing said, what is said. That's epos, basically, epos. And the other is mythos, right? So he's emphasizing here that mythos and logos. He makes the point that putting mythology together as though the logos can help you understand myth is like trying to carry water in a sieve. And what's the point of this? Mythos is already a word for something like the word or the saying. Closer would be the tale or the narrative, right? Mythos is the tale. Mythos is the traditional tale. It's the narrative that it surrounds or explains. Logos is the account or the reason, but it's fundamentally the account. It's also the gathering. Words gather. That's their logos character, and they give an account. That's what you get in Heraclitus's use of it as a meaning something like structure, and that turns into something like reason, but as structure of things in our notion of logic or how things go logic. But that's also just the word for speech. So word can be, the word as the tale is mythos. The world is as the spoken word, as the thing said, is epos, and that's also where we get epic from. And then as the reason or account, it's logos. Why does this matter? When we get to the oblivion section, Heidegger's going to be making the claim that the fundamental thing going on in all of this is that the experience of aletheia is being occluded or falling into oblivion, in part because the contact with the mythological or the mythical, not even the mythological, the mythos level is gone, right? Mythos has been discarded as a form of the fictional, as a form of the false, replaced by logos alone as the logical and as the reasoned account. So a reason that has lost the, if we're going to put it this way, the poetic contact, the poetic delicatesse of the poetically expressed original experiences, something like that, is a dropping away of the mythos understanding of word for replacing it with the reason understanding of word as logos. So logos is defeating mythos, is kind of what's going on here. Whereas originally they're much closer together. At the time of the Greeks he's talking about here, they're much closer together. Plato is famously a philosopher where, you know, in every dialogue there will be 1 to 3 myths. And Plato scholars all say the myth is the most interesting thing, right? It may also be the easiest to relate to. The arguments that you have to entertain logically and see what they entail, are they to modern minds often the more rigorous to a certain school of philosophers, the more rigorous bits of the content, but the myth is often the more disclosive for both insight and Plato's actual understanding or meanings, something like that. It's the image, right? And Plato typically gives you an image and a lot of accounts weaving the images together. In that sense, Plato retains that contact with myth. I think it's fair to say that contact with myth is significantly occluded already in Aristotle, who was much less enamored of myth in his philosophy. Whereas you cannot think of an important Platonic dialogue without remembering things like, you know, the myth of the cave, or the myth of recollection, or the myth of the designed steed that carries up to the heavens and the Phaedrus. And, you know, these striking images are what you get in Plato, right? You also get that contact with the myth, obviously, in Parmenides, in the poem at the beginning, we're seeing that. And in Heraclitus, you know, with, you know, a war is the father and king of all, those sorts of things. That's definitely keeping its contact with the mythic / religious / poetic background of Greek thinking and language. Okay. So first, just thoughts on what he's saying here about this, the importance of this contact with myth. No thoughts.
I have a thought about that.
Go ahead, James.
You know, I feel pretty disenchanted with Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
And is it because it's historicized? Did it somehow manage to become believed literally? And did that ruin it?
Fair questions. I mean, some would say that one of the things Christianity did was to demythologize the natural world, to the point where a lot of the things that were poetic and full of feeling for the divine, something like that, were regarded as not religious in the Christian sense, and therefore were secularized, right? Does that then, and then that may then go on to affect the Christian content as well, right? But there's an element of even original or historical Christianity, which is debunking the pagan myths, if you get me, challenging their moral authority. You're telling these interesting stories about Zeus, but the Zeus in those interesting stories is a rapist, right? So he's clearly not God, right? Because nothing that morally questionable deserves that name, something like that. And this can be used to dissolve, as though with acid, a lot of the poetic content that was trying to say things in this nuanced and poetic language, if you like, and was more concerned with the it being striking, memorable, or the content, the lesson being conveyed being true, than the lesson that was conveyed being uplifting, right? But are they read that way? This is a criticism that the myths already had in Plato, right? Even before Christianity. The sections of the Republic that are all about dealing with the poets and what they teach about the gods are all about, editing for content. The classic myths, which are going to teach people the wrong moral lessons and this sort of thing, right? So there's some element of that which is involved in a kind of demystification, if I can put it that way, of this poetic background. Are there still elements of that poetic background going on in Christianity, especially early Christianity? I would say yes. Are they also going on in traditions of mysticism, both Christian and non-Christian, afterwards? I would say yes. Is there a giant revival of feeling for that in the Romantics and people like Hölderlin? Absolutely, right? People like Hölderlin are lamenting the fact that some of that poetic sense that is there in the Greek thinkers and poets has been lost, and want to bring it back. And that's no question. That's one of the reasons that Heidegger is holding out Hölderlin as being in our future, not just in our past, because that's sort of where part of where he's going himself. I think Heidegger is making the case here that part of the reason that you get this occlusion of the mythos level is the rise of an understanding in terms of a different understanding of truth, and as true and false, and as adequation to the thing, something like that, that then in the modern era turns into certainty and subjective certainty and becomes very subjectivized, right? And that can progressively break the context with truth in the original sense, both because it is skeptical of anything mythical in the first place, and because it's driving in a direction of truth as a human construction or a human tool, something like that. That's what I'm seeing Heidegger himself saying. I've got my own take on various of the steps, but I think that that's what he is saying. So overall, his diagnosis is that after the time of roughly pre-Socratics and Plato, he might throw in Aristotle, I might not, but around that time, there is a shift away from this original understanding of Aletheia, and the newer understanding of Aletheia, the more Romanized and then the more modernized notions of Aletheia, is going to lose its respect for both the mythic and the mysterious, right? It's going to aim at certainty and clarity in a way that does not like the fuzziness of the mythical, and does not like the unknownness of the mysterious, right? I think there's one place along the way where he gives a kind of reference to Descartes as part of the reason that people think of the unknown is just a residual, because everything real is knowable in itself. It's the kind of thing you get in Descartes. Something can only count as real if it has thinkable attributes. Therefore, everything is knowable in principle, because the things which are not knowable in principle are not. Right? That's the kind of thing you get in Descartes. The idea that the unknowable in principle is a principle that can be used to carve away anything that would count as the mythic or the mystery. I'm sorry, we have to let Isabel in. She arrived late. Welcome, Isabel. Sorry, it took a while to let you in. I was in the middle of talking.
So is he saying that with mythos, because we'll have the mythos of day and night. Mythos supports concealment and unconcealment in a way that the other forms of speech, what were they, logos, and the other one don't?
Logos could. What he's actually saying is that language in all of these Greek forms is the place where the truth of these experiences gets captured and transmitted, right? It's where it comes to transmittable appearance, if I can put it that way, and is passed on. What the thinkers do, what the sayers do, is try to capture the original experiences of something like unconcealment and to pass them down in their mythic and epic and logos saying, right? He's not saying that that the logos saying of that, it has a particular excising function that it can't do one of these, because he understands the transition as something where even the logos level changed its meaning, right? But the main thing he's talking about here is how there's something which is captured in language in general with all of these, and that yes, one of the things we have to get to when we get to the Plato stuff is he's having a bit of a disagreement with Plato about the seeing versus the language version of the origin of understanding of being, something like that. But the main thing he's saying here is that language is the house of being, that language is the way that these things appear, are captured, and are passed on, right? And that does mean that in order to hear them, you have to be able to hear that language with the kind of go to this way, the kind of nuanced ear that the poetic has, right? Again, I have to work a bit here because my own objections or my own reinterpretations are struggling to the surface here, right? I find that there are things going on in the pre-Socratics that have this level of poetic and mythic understanding that already intimate some of the things like correspondence theory of truth, right? Heraclitus says, wise is homolegen hen panta. Homolegen, same saying the same, conformity with what the logos says. That's very close to correspondence. It's not yet full Aristotelian correspondence, but it is saying you can't obey your own whims, you can't obey me, you have to obey the logos, because wisdom is saying the same thing the logos says, right? So that coherence with the gathered logos is and explicitly said as the same saying the same. That's already a homeostasis understanding of truth, and that's there in Heraclitus. It's not a later addition, in my opinion. But anyway, these are little places where I might be disagreeing with some of bits of his claim. What he's claiming is that the nuanced and poetic language is the way that these experiences are captured, preserved, conveyed. Again, the objection I want to make is how well are they conveyed if the original experiences aren't there, if the evidence of his history is that they fall away as soon as someone only has the language and they don't have the original experience, right? If there's a falling away from this original understanding, if there's an occlusion, it's because even someone who reads the word Aletheia won't necessarily have the experience of Aletheia the way the earlier Greeks did. I would say that if you want to preserve that, yes, you need the layer of the myth, but the primary reason you need the layer of the myth is not for the word, it's for the visions. I can understand what Plato feels as Aletheia, as disclosedness, and what he thinks of as concealment from the allegory of the cave and the myth of Ur and the myth of the ring of the ancestor of Gyges more than I can from a logical argument, right? Because he's showing me. I can see it. Anyway, I'm just breaking a lance for my own site origin of Thea. But what he's saying here is he's connecting it to word and language at the level of mythos and logos and epos. I don't know if that helps. Let's sorry, Isabel, sorry if you were delayed coming in. Do you want to tell us anything about your first reactions to things a little late? We're already in the exposition, but
Yes, oh, there I am. Yes, I'm sorry I'm late. I have family visiting, and it's going to be hard to be here, but I did want to be here. I'm not 100% sure that I finished all the reading, and I have been doing it in spurts, so it has been hard. I have found it very difficult with the Greek.
yes.
I stopped looking for translations, but I think I have an inkling of why he is so concentrated now on Aletheia, and I've come to realize, first of all, that having read Heidegger for many years, or read about Heidegger, I haven't read, but I've read very few Heidegger. Thanks to you, Jason, I've read 2 texts, and to another person, I read 1 more text. But I realized now that he didn't pull all his theories and his insights out of the blue. No,
Yeah.
they're extremely thought out, extremely well researched. You may not like his research. You may not like the way he treats Plato. You may not like what he does with Parmenides or Herodotus, or I forget the other. But
Heraclitus.
anyway,
Yeah.
but they are well thought out. And this thing about Aletheia is much more encompassing than just unconcealment. Much more. It affects I would even say it affects our political system. It affects the way we live. It affects the way we look at the world, the way it has an enormous reach, enormous. And the more I think about it, the more I think I'm right, that I'm very happy to have discovered Heidegger, and to be able to read him even in my 80s. But so I will be listening attentively, and thank you very much for letting me in.
Sure. On the point of affects things, there's another thinker who put it this way: the question is not whether or not fundamental theories of the universe affect things, but whether in the long run anything else does. Right? But these fundamental philosophy things definitely move all, and I definitely will also bring up some of the ways in which these things are related to polis, because he does talk about polis when he gets into Plato. Obviously, the myth he's going to talk about the plane of lethe occurs in the Republic, which is the Aletheia. The regime is the name of the book. We'll talk a little bit where that comes from. And there are some other things along the way where, there's some other things along the way where I would say that some of Plato's wisdom on this subject is apparent in the things which Heidegger is seeing and reacting to, even if Heidegger himself does not call attention to them. Okay, certainly. The next thing we were about to get to is the issue of this forgetting, oblivion, the oblivion of being, the eclipse of Aletheia, that whole structure. Okay. So first, I assume that the basic structure of forgetting he's laying out here, which is his first attempt to explain, the lethe word, but not as a thing, but as a verb. He explains the lethe word as the verb, and its raw form, and it's formed with an epi in front of it, and the epi in front of it is really making it about oneself, right? It's in a realm, but it's making it about oneself, a self-forgetting. So you get forgetting and self-forgetting are the things which he is going to then trace to oblivion. Although to be clear, he calls oblivion the thing which happens to the thing which is forgotten, as opposed to the whole structure itself. The whole structure itself is something like forgetting and self-forgetting. but he wants to draw that as a bigger thing than it usually is thought of, right? He says the usual way that we think of forgetting is just inattention. It's just a tendency to distraction that leads you to take your eye off of something and therefore to lose it. And that's not sufficient. That's not deep enough to count as what he's calling forgetting here, let alone the self-forgetting. He has a couple of these translations, attempts to be more literal in the translations of what the Greek words are saying here, which is something like, I am concealed from myself as the one who X, right? So forgetting is something like being concealed from oneself. You've lost a piece of yourself, right? You've lost some element of awareness or contact with you, right? That's something that's going on in forgetting. And then this forgetting is something that you, although it befalls you, you're not aware of it when it's befalling you, might only be aware of it after the fact, right? You might recollect back that oh, I forgot that. But in the period of time when you had forgotten and have not remembered that you have forgotten that you have forgotten as well, right? You're in this characteristic double self concealment. You cannot see, not only do you not know, but you cannot see that you do not know, right? Something like that.
Right. So would an example be like, I have a cell phone, but I've forgotten the number, versus I forgot I ever had a cell phone, would be oblivion.
Yeah. I'm thinking more of there's a line from a song where someone is talking about, this happened 7 times and this happened 700 times, whatever. And one of the lines is, and for 7 years, I forgot my name, right? This is an experience of a hermit or an experience of someone who has gone through like a profound depression, right? That they didn't know who they were for 7 years, right? That's the kind of self-forgetting I think he's talking about. It's less
So
that
you forgot your name. You just can't remember what it was, whether it was Paul or Peter.
no, that for someone to forget their name, the reason that it happens is there is no one calling them by their name. They are completely alone, and their name therefore winds up passing out of use, passing out of their use, and then they no longer think of themselves in terms of it. And at that point, it has fallen into something which they do not know that they ever had, right? Because a name is yes, it's something you apply to yourself, but it's something that others apply to you first, and you understand it only as what they call you first, and then you call yourself that. But there's this element of it has this publicness to it. It has this communication language to it, and profound solitude is a place where your name is meaningless, right? There's no one to communicate it with. There's no one to call it. And so it passes out of use, and then after passing out of use, passes even out of consciousness as something that was ever there. I think that's the kind of thing he's talking about. So the when I forget where my cell phone is, right? It's forgetting some past action I was because I was distracted and my attention was elsewhere. That's different from the whole arena where the truths about that thing were operationally important to me, were part of the narrative that I was in, right? Go away. Why is he trying to draw on a notion of oblivion like this? I think it's because there's a particular oblivion he's thinking of. He's not thinking of just everything that can happen to someone in general that might be called forgetting. He's thinking of the forgottenness of the original concept of truth throughout this, right? He's trying to point it ahead to when Western philosophy loses its contact with the original notion of aletheia. That is the you can call that a change in the doctrine of truth. You can also call it a forgetting of an original experience of truth. if you take that far enough, it becomes an oblivion of truth, right? When truth is the kind of error without which people like us cannot live, that is a tool for our purposes, a tool of our drives, and part of our survival value or something like that, you have lost contact with the anything like a highest religious calling to be the place or site where truth is unveiled to existence, something like that. And that is a kind of, it's a loss of purpose, which is also a loss of a sense that the plane on which such purposes can exist is even possible, right? It's the difference between someone who feels an almost religious calling of conscience and someone for whom conscience is a word and that word is air, right? To paraphrase Falstaff, right? Does that help?
Yeah, so it's like the forgetting of being, that we're no longer even aware that there is such a thing as being creating a world.
He's definitely steering towards the oblivion of being. And the original being in time was like, how can people, always use this and consider this the most, they always have some understanding of this and it's always frowned about it, but none of the philosophers seem to have any notion of it that makes any sense or is in any way consistent, something like that. Yes, he's steering towards oblivion of being, but being understood in a definite, specific way that he wants to tie back to the original beginning. Sorry, Dan, hand up.
Yeah, related to this, and it seems like, and to that, I jump a little bit ahead, but it's related to this, like when that warrior returns and he's kind of saying that there is a certain amount of the proper amount of drink from the river. Like if it's too much, and it's kind of like, seems like we are sent into to this life with a kind of destiny that we have a knowledge of this oblivion, or we don't have, and it's not much we can do about it. It seems like that. I think Heidegger is going to use some appropriation or destining or something like that. And you also talk about having these experiences, and it seems like you cannot have them if you don't have that kind of right amount of tuning to this, whatever it's happening here. And like Heidegger himself, he always said his life that he's like he's obsessed with being. The being cannot, it's always obsessing him. It's like it's bugging him continuously, and he has no option but to do these kind of things. And it's, well, a lot of people, you see them, they try to understand Heidegger and they fight and then try and nothing. There is no way they can get that experience. And it's again, goes back to that destining and whatever,
Saying
returning.
that in mythical terms, many of them have drunk too deep from the water of lethe, and the possibility of anything like the remembering is denied to them. I mean, that is certainly what Plato wants to be there in as a possible deduction from the myth. He's trying to explain, it's not really the right term because he's giving a myth of it. He's giving a mythic correspondence to the difference between those who can remember what they once knew in this life versus those who cannot remember, something like that. But this is all related to, there's a whole doctrine in Plato of recollection, as how a truth about something we have not personally experienced can be present to us, something like that. But in terms of just as an attunement to the level of being, or an attunement to the level at which truth happens, I think Heidegger thinks that the sense for that can be awakened. He thinks it's first awakened as a sense of lack. It's first awakened as a sense of something missing, right? You don't positively have a feel for truth at first. You just have the feeling that something is off, that something is missing. This is the early section of Contributions. And I think there's a place also in the question concerning technology where he talks about this. He talks about how it operates only by a felt sense of lack of something. a something missing in the meaning space is the way we would put it in modern terms, right? A sense of loss of meaning, and that can be felt as a lack, even if you don't have any particular conscious positive belief that meaning should be there, or what it would mean for meaning to be there, let alone that the place you'll find meaning is in the understanding of the history of the revelation of being, or something like that, right? You're never gonna start with that as the goal. You're just gonna feel something missing. So you feel some sort of lack. Anyway, this is all about how anything like oblivion might be recovered from. But the first idea here is just that it is possible to lose contact with aletheia as disclosure in a way that will it will not be apparent to you that you have lost that contact, something like that. And I think this is related to what he's calling the occlusion created by the bastion of veritas, right? This is definitely part and parcel of the whole narrative of the history we're being told here. And one of the things to notice going on here is, a mythos is an orienting narrative, right? And Heidegger is giving us an orienting narrative of the history of Western philosophy that is his own, it's not a Platonic myth, it's not an image, but it's what acts as one for him, right? We're learning where to situate ourselves in the history that is the story, that is the progressive narrative of where we are in the revelation, loss, or recovery of awareness of being, something like that. I'm just pointing out that the historical thing there is not a separate analytic thing for Heidegger. It is the mythos narrative, right? That's doing the same thing that the allegory of the cave would do for Plato, right? His version of the history is doing that. Okay. Okay. We talked about oblivion. I think there's probably more to be said about oblivion. I want to talk about the polis and the mythos and the polis, because first of all, even in the section on the mythos and what has been occluded since the Greeks, he's already bringing up this notion of there being a sort of publicness of awareness of aletheia via mythos and essential saying among the Greeks, even before he starts talking about polis specifically as the title of the work that the myth of is going to be in. Okay, so I want to talk about the picture that we're getting of the Greek city, if you get me, before we even get to polis, or when he first brings up polis. Do you guys have a sense of what his picture of the Greek city is? He's giving you a picture of the Greek city and the Greek myth and the openness to aletheia among the Greeks. Talks about how mythos is always Greek mythos because there isn't any other kind that deserves that name because it's a Greek word. But he's presenting this as things which, because they're raised on Homer and Hesiod and this language, is in a way a birthright of the Greek polis and people living in the Greek polis. I want to get a sense of people's read on what he is saying about the Greek polis on the one hand, and any reactions they may have to that read on the other.
Isn't he saying something like that polis is kind of the historical place where this tension between aletheia and concealment happened, and it's with all the good and bad things, or the struggle happens and people take part in it?
He is saying that that's where the history happens, for sure, but he also is not so far calling it the place where the concealment happens, right? The concealment has been shunted off to the translation into Latin, and it's been something that happens when Roman notions of imperium come in and muddy up the poetic concealment revelation frame of the Greeks, right? That's different from saying the Greek city is where this fight first occurred, right?
Right. So the Romans, they have the res publica, which is like the public body, where the polis, it's the community rotating around its center.
And everyone participating in that communal centered orienting place or site that is the place or site where mythos reveals aletheia, right? Where the gods are present, right? There is no question that that picture of the polis is something that you find extolled or held up as an ideal in people like Aeschylus and Sophocles. You find it in people like Jacob Burckhardt, romanticizing the Greek city. You find it in early Nietzsche in The Birth of Tragedy. You have an phrase in German 19th century for the tragic age of the Greeks specifically. You find it in the, I'm thinking of historians, especially Burckhardt, but others, praising the Athens of the Pericles funeral oration in Thucydides, right? There's some peak of awareness of human possibility or something like that that is located in Periclean Athens as a place when, you know, all the stars have aligned for an openness to truth about the human condition, something like that.
Isn't he saying that kind of all this, they took the Roman concept and move it to the Greek and then idealize it?
What I'm asking is that picture of the Greeks the one you get from the Greeks themselves? Because I think it's a retrospective, right? When you look at the Greeks themselves, Heraclitus is looking around at the other Greeks and saying, how can they hide from that which never sets, right? He's not looking around and saying they're also enlightened. His experience is that Heraclitus is enlightened, and the people around him they prefer hay to gold, right? Or is the polis the site in which being is revealed to Plato, or is it the cave, right? So I see some, put it this way, romanticizing retrospective that is extolling the Greek polis in ways that the most philosophical people in the Greek polis did not extol it, right? And extolling it as though the content of the most enlightened and philosophical of the Greeks was the public Greek experience of all. If you go look at what those most enlightened Greeks are saying, on the other hand, they do not have that attitude towards the polis. Not to put too fine a point upon it. They may see that as an ideal human potentiality that a perfect polis might be able to instantiate in accord with the same sort of idealism that you're getting from a Burckhardt. But they don't think it's actual. And not only do they not think it's actual, they think that the confidence or belief in oneself expressed in that is unsound, borderline dangerous hubris, right? The Periclean Athens praised by Pericles in the funeral oration is immediately followed in Thucydides himself with the nemesis of the plague. You've had all this overweening self-confidence of Athens, and then it is laid low by a disease that kills Pericles himself. And the same overweening Athenian ambition is expressed in their speech to the Melians at the Melian dialogue, where they say, justice is only a question among equals in power, while the strong do what they can and the weak suffer what they must. And they immediately go to Sicily and get destroyed, right? So the structure that you get in Thucydides himself is, yes, there is that almost arrogant, hubristic sense of being the center and revelation of being. And also, by the way, that means that they are beyond the morals of the past. And that is always followed by nemesis, right? That is the pride that goeth before the fall, to the Greeks themselves. Why am I bringing this up? I think that extolling of the Greek city is, it's missing a core part of what the philosophy of the time actually taught, which was all about the limitations of the city. Heidegger goes on at some length about why Plato called this book the Aletheia. It's not clear that Plato ever called the book the Aletheia. His editors called it the Aletheia. The subtitle of it is On Justice, and that probably came earlier in the time of the Platonic schools. We're not sure how late Aletheia came in. Aletheia means something like the regime. On justice is its main topic, and it looks for justice in the city in order to understand justice in the man. But it's primarily about justice in the city and the man. And its fundamental action is the cynics say that justice is tyranny and advantage, and the idealistic young men want to be convinced that they should be just for its own sake, and not think that getting away with hidden injustice is preferable, and the life of tyranny is preferable, because that's what all the cynics around them are trying to teach them. That's what the city itself is trying to teach them, effectively. And it takes philosophy to teach them otherwise. How does philosophy teach them otherwise? It teaches them that is a life of self-forgetting, self-delusion, a lie in the soul, disorder, the lower desires put above the higher intellect, a whole bunch of things. At bottom, it's the cave. It's telling them that is living in a lie. So the actual structure of the Republic is not one myth of at the end. It's three myths. The ring of the ancestor of Gyges is the myth that if I can be invisible, I have impunity, and I should use it to commit injustice and get away with it. That's the challenge at the beginning in the first myth. And then the myth of the cave at the peak of the Republic is all about the people stuck in political life without the awareness of truth outside of it are captive prisoners in conventional lies. And the greatest sophist is the political multitude. That's what you get by the middle. And by the end, with the story of where we're going to the plains of Lethe, it's about the afterlife. It's about the what happens to souls afterwards based upon what they actually were in their life. And the person who has lived his life without philosophy picks for his next life the greatest tyranny. Whereas wily Odysseus, last to choose, picks a little obscure private life over here that never commits an injustice, right? So there's this grand overarching moral lesson of the whole thing that the myths are strung around, that is about wanting to live in truth and wanting to avoid the lures of tyranny, right? That is absolutely key here, right? And it's the farthest thing from a hubristic, we, the Greek city, are so gloriously open to the truth that we live the truth out and deserve all, right? Okay. I put it to you that Heidegger himself sees this in his own life, right? He has little comments along the way where he says, we used to understand that greatness was a matter of philosophy and theology, and now the propaganda is telling us that the only thing we should worry about is corn and oil. Right? He knows the debasement that emphasis on the political brings to the goals of human life, right? Plato knew that in spades, and the Republic is about it, right? when he talks about the occlusion of the a sense of truth, that's also what Plato is talking about. But Plato is talking about it not as something which is an historical fate that only befell the West after the time of the Greeks, when everyone lived in the truth. No, it's something which is befalling the Greeks too, all around him, and how they live their lives when they are oriented on the politics and power and tyranny, right? Which means that they're not living in truth. Okay. So there is a limitation here that Heidegger is under, that he's only interpreting one little myth at the end of the Republic, but he's not placing that in the context of the whole Republic. And when he tries to, with the reference to polis, what I see is a Burckhardt and Nietzsche idealization of the Greek polis that the best of the Greeks would have repudiated as arrogant, as hubristic. I want to pause and give people a chance to react to those claims I'm making, because they're obviously from my own perspective.
So I think this is related to an introduction to metaphysics. He talks about the polis. He's talking about Antigone, and that there's 3 levels. That first you understand the polis as a collection of things, like you can go to the agora and you can buy things. And then the polis organizes them into different worlds. So there's the world of food, or the world of getting things for military campaigns. And third is the openness in the polis, which allows you to come up with new understandings that you didn't have before. So things,
what I want is evidence that third thing is something the polis does, as opposed to individual thinkers in the polis do. And I'm going to come back to Antigone too in just a second. So Antigone, people may not know this, but Antigone is one of the things cited in Hegel in his history, or in the Phenomenology of Spirit, as one of these key steps in the unfolding of Greek spirit. Because what Antigone is Antigone represents the fact that the hyperpolitization of only the politics matters is smashed on the private, the family, and the religious, right? And Antigone is the play about that. It's the play where your obligations to the city, which is to hate those whom the city hates, and therefore not to bury the dead because the city is trying to take revenge on them even in the afterlife. You have to reject the city when it does that, because that is impious, and obedience to the gods is higher than obedience to the city. So Antigone repudiates everything political to be piously correct in her relations to her brother, right? And to Hegel, this is the Greek acknowledgement that political life is a limited thing, and then when it goes beyond that, it commits hubris, and nemesis will follow, right? That same understanding of the political has to stay within bounds, or it will become monstrous, is also there in the Republic. It's the point I'm making, right? So what you don't get in the Greeks is some hypostasis of the political as containing the deepest things in human life. Antigone is checking the political with the familial and the religious, and the Aletheia is checking the political with philosophy and the afterlife, right? And to me, there's no question that's part of the Greek understanding of the political. The political is something which, it has this inherently hubristic tendency. It tends to consume all. It tends to become, it makes extreme claims for itself and tries to take over everything, but it does not deserve to take over everything, is the Greek understanding, right? It has to happen inside a world of a fundamental piety and a fundamental truth question that gives bounds to what the polis can aspire to. And when the polis does not respect that, nemesis follows, right? That to me is a Greek understanding you see in Antigone, Plato, Aristotle, right? I'm not seeing that here in the assessment of the polis as this, unified site of the revelation of being that is trying to put together the political and the true and something like a religious revelation through myth and public cult, something like that. All of that to an actual Greek would read as hubris, I'm saying. And I put it to you that that's not unrelated to the problem that Heidegger himself finds himself in 1943, right? That lesson still needs to be learned.
Yeah, and so also relating when he brings it up in Introduction to Metaphysics, and here in the Parmenides, he also relates it to the uncanny, that
Absolutely.
we don't know, the polis doesn't know yet.
The place where I find Heidegger's soundest here is when he's talking about trying to keep this connection to the mythical as a connection to truth and the unknown. And when he is describing, he's trying to describe the plane of lethe as a demonis topos, as an uncanny place, as a demonic place, right? And that sense of the uncanny, that sense of the of a limit, that sense of a surrounding mystery, and all of that connected to a almost religious piety towards truth as being bigger than us and more important than us, and about which we have to be reverently on our toes and careful, something like that. I think that's absolutely there in the Greek words and myths and experiences he's describing, and I think he's not at all wrong to call for that. It just also has a corollary. All that preaches humility about the worldly ambitions of anything like a city, right? Cities happen in the background of the mystery and the truth and religious awe or something like it. And if they're not restrained by that awe, they're going to go wrong.
That's an example of getting stuck in metaphysics, that you've lost that awe. And he says, I think it's Bolshevism is the Soviets plus electricity. And
yes,
they've lost.
He's perfectly fine in recognizing the lack of awe in the Soviet Union in 1943, but he needs to be recognizing a little bit closer to home as well. And in the way in which even the Jacob Burckhardts and the Nietzsches were reading the Greek polis, and even he in 1935 imagines that they were recreating that, right? That was their own lack of awe. Okay. How to get that stuff out about the polis? I want to talk about the plane of lethe. Okay. The plane of lethe. First of all, he spends an enormous amount of time on the lethe part of it, and on the daemones. It's a daemones topes. It's a demonic place. It's an uncanny place. He doesn't talk about the plane part. He gives a translation of how it's described, which is a very unliteral translation, but that's okay. We'll come to that. But first, what is the plane? The plane is just the walked on thing. It's a path. It's very much like the like the way he was talking about earlier, because the literal word is just pedion, what you walk on, the being upon which one walks. Right, that's what it is to be a plane in Greek. So and the lethe pedion, which he rightly says is not called one of the other, is the unseen path. Right. It is the path through the unseen, but it's also just the unseen path, the unseen way that everyone must walk, something like that. he rightly brings out all the poetic connections between night and death and afterlife and what beings disappear into here. That is why this it is an uncanny place, because it is the unseen path that is still a path, in the sense that everyone must walk along it or walk it. Okay. I think that some of these more poetic aspects of how the Greeks are experiencing this, how to put this, they translate rather well. We can get all of them, but I'm not sure all of them do, right? This is all very much, definitely very much connected to the structure that Heidegger is talking about as world and earth. Lethe is without world. Lethe is world's eclipse, right? But world's eclipse is still not being. But there's definitely eclipse of world in Lethe. I want to give people a chance to tell me their own reactions to the poetry of the plane of Lethe, what it made them think or feel. Did it convey itself to them? Do I need to go through all the poetic aspects of this, or is that obvious enough to everyone? I'm going to get to the water in a second, but first, just about the plane itself as the unseen place that all must walk.
So he calls it the plane. He also calls it the field.
Yes.
Lethe. And earlier he talked about the field of Aletheia.
Yes.
And so you have this field of where things withdraw into oblivion. And on top of that, you can then have the field of Aletheia, of the things that present from out of. Nah.
Not clear that it's on top of it, but
Well, yeah, that was me.
Distinct from it, right? So the plane is described. Both plane and field are described as what you walk upon. There is further description of it in Plato, and it's described as treeless and as not having anything that comes forth from the earth. So the treeless, the Greek word is the same as dendrite, right? Dendrite just means tree, right? So it's adendros, without trees, right? And he glosses that with something much less literal. But then also without any of the things that spring forth from the earth, and that's using Gaia as earth, and also the phusis word. So there's no arising appearing. There are no trees. Nothing grows, right? And in the plane of Lethe, it's not. It is a barren plain because nothing grows, because here the earth does not bring forth. I would put it to you that gardeners gave us phusis as the plant coming out of the ground into the light, but philosophers gave us that as beings coming out of non-being into being, right? The latter is not just there in the Greek word, right? Philosophers had to read it in, right? More deeply than the underlying poetry, which is just an image you can get in your garden, right? But on the plane of Lethe, nothing comes forth as phusis normally happens. Why? Because phusis is not just arising, appearing, it's shining. The phu in phusin is light. And Lethe is deprived of the ability of being seen. The theia in Lethe is seeable, seen. So without being seen means there's no light, which means there's no arising, appearing, because there's no shining, so there's no phusis, right? So there cannot be phusis in Lethe, and because there cannot be phusis in Lethe, neither does anything grow there, neither is there anything that has grown there, right? It is barren because it is deprived of the ability of all the things which light conveys, and growth and shining forth and phusis, all of those are tied to light. And tied to light means also tied to the visible. I'm going through this in this detail because this imagery is saturated not with the hearing of the word, it's saturated with the understanding of these things in terms of visibility, in terms of light and darkness, and in terms of image, right? Heidegger is on the surface making the claim that it is in language that we capture these experiences and can manage to secure them and convey them. Language is the level on which being happens. The meaning being realm is not just the appearances of things, but the securing of those mere seemings into meaning, right? We talked about the appearance in the open, right? The thing which it has to rise to the level of being capturable in a meaning to be on the plane of being. And he's tying that very directly to what language does, right? Language is the meaning place. But all of the things about truth that he's seeing in the Greek words, which he's seeing correctly, is there in the Greek words, are not talking about words at all. They're talking about sight. They're talking about light. They're talking about appearing. They're talking about visibility, right? So the Greeks themselves, with their words, are pointing away from their words towards what they can see, right? Why does this matter? This matters because Plato is going to tell you that the place where meaning happens is at the level of idea. An idea is the look. It's the seen thing in the it's the seen in the outward, right? So the Plato is being very Greek there. He's not being some later distorter of the underlying Greek sense of truth. The physis, light metaphysics, the Aletheia revelation, lethe aspect, all of those fit with the outward look idea thing that you get from Plato. And in other words, he is continuous with the Greek mythological background of Aletheia itself. He's not distorting it. He's firmly in it. And firmly in it is pointing away from word and towards vision, right? Yes, it is trying to capture in words what essentially happens as vision, right? Okay. Why am I bringing this up? One of the things that that Heidegger says, and I think rightly, that language tries to do is to capture that, make it conveyable. Is the evidence of the occlusion that Heidegger is describing, assuming that it's correct, evidence that the words succeed in capturing it and conveying it to the next person who sees the words? I put it to you that it is not. The evidence is, if you have only the word and you cannot use it to recover the original experience of the original seeing, the original intellectual intuition, you will fall away from what was there poetically in the previous words. Heidegger is trying to put that in terms of, can you see the nuance to recover the original experience that was, in this, he calls it history, in these words. And that's a fair way of putting it, but the reason that is the test is the words are not enough. You have to go back from the words to the intellectual intuition behind them. You have to be able to go back to the level of the vision, right? You have to be able to see the things that people are talking about. If you can see the things that people are talking about, you can use the words in ways which are just to them and meaning preservative with them. If you can't see those things, if you only have the words, it is not true that by just keeping those words in something like their original meanings, you will preserve those meanings. Exactly the opposite. If all you have is the words, you're going to detach them from their semantics. You're going to have a syntactic system. You're going to understand it logically, right? You're going to see what follows syllogistically from word patterns, and you're going to Aristotelize it, right? You're going to turn it into ratio, right?
Yeah, but I say, so Aristotle will say, so let's say you have seat and it's a word, but it only makes sense when you sit in it. By sitting in it, you make it a seat.
Mhm.
If it's just the word, oh, we have a seat,
Mhm.
it doesn't capture the meaning. It's by sitting in the seat that you capture the meaning of the seat.
Yes, but something that never sits in seats can use the word reasonably perfectly.
Right, in our modern calculating world, you can have a spreadsheet of the number of seats you need for the banquet.
Not just that. ChatGPT will understand all the uses of the word seat just fine, right? It will, but it's never sat on anything in its life. It doesn't have a life to sit on them, right?
Well, it certainly understands the words and how to use them.
This is the point that I'm getting at. The question is, where is the semantic connection, and is the thing he is describing as the falling away from being able to experience aletheia directly, and something like an occlusion by the Roman bastion of veritas? Can anything like that happen except by a loss of contact with the semantic originals, a loss of the experience that gave rise to it in the first place? I claim that it's very clearly that such a loss that he is describing. Sorry, Dan has a comment.
Yeah, I agree with you, but also I think he's trying to attack that visual thing mainly because of the connection ideas, like move there into ideas, then into representation, and then we have like the whole picture, which is kind of an entire mess that he attack, and he's trying to go back kind of towards. And I agree with you. You cannot recuperate the original experience, probably not from images, but also not from words, like you said. And I think his later project with the event is kind of this try to move away from away from images, probably a little bit from words also, but it's that kind of movement to understand presence not in images or necessarily in words, but as event. I think that was. But again, I don't think you can move backwards from any of these back to the original experience. So I agree with you. So it's kind of it's a difficult issue.
I agree it's a difficult issue. I agree with you that the reason he is leery of image is he's afraid that it's going to go to some very Cartesian representation place, and that it will devolve into world as representation and picture, and mind as camera, right? None of which can have the actual experiences, because if you don't have the nuanced comportment in all of the freighted with affect aspect of comportment, you are going to miss the original experiences. You're absolutely right that that is the reason why he is shying away from the image aspect of this. But that is not fair to Plato, because Plato is not responsible for the misuses made by people between or such thinking between Descartes and Schopenhauer. He doesn't have that misuse in him, right? So yes, that's part of his motive, but you can find the things which are missing in the snapshot representation dissection camera view of original experience or something like that, without throwing out the fact that the original experience of aletheia is a theia which is visible, seen and unseen. You're not going to get to concealment and unconcealment without making reference to seen and unseen. And he himself needs a reference to open. And open is not obstructed for sight. That's what open means, right? So I think that in later Heidegger, he mostly does try to put this thing on words. He wants language to do this. He wants his descriptions of things to capture it in language, but his own most persuasive or compelling achievements are the images he gives us, the images of the open, the images of Dasein as a place or site where being happens. Not only that, the things which we can verify for ourselves by direct introspection of being in time, about the structures of Dasein, right? So in his own convincing methods and in his own achievements, he's way more imagistically platonizing than he sometimes lets on. He does want these things to be conveyable as dictum, as sayings, as what the sayer says, and therefore, you know, captures poetically. His money is on poetry to do this successfully, if I can put it that way. But does the poetry succeed in doing that if it's not imagistic poetry? I deny it. I claim that the imagistic poetry has a better chance of doing it because there's an aspect of connection to truth, which is always imagistic first, and it's only secondarily in the words. And if you reduce it to the words, you're going to get something which is syntactic rather than semantic, and you're going to break the connections to the original experiences. That is my claim.
Is it also? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Pete.
Can you let me in? I need to move to my mobile device.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, not a problem.
Sorry, we have to do all this waiting room stuff in the first place. Okay, you should be in now.
Yeah.
Recording in progress.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, sorry. Go ahead, Dan. You've got a little bit of infinite regress there. Sorry, go ahead, Dan.
We used to read like those Parmenides, like his sayings way back with like his first sayings and also the Anaximandros and Heraclitus. So those are kind of like are not imagistic at all. And I think Heidegger is kind of trying his project. He was going back to those first thinkers and try to recuperate that kind of saying being without making use to images and ideas and stuff like that. And I think he was trying to bypass Plato, but I agree with you that he was still going back to images in his life, and he's falling back to that. But I think his project was with the event was trying to go back to what Parmenides did way back with.
So let's talk about Parmenides for a second, right? Parmenides is giving us an image of being drawn by the chariots of the daughters of the sun to the gateway of the dawn to be told about 3 ways by a goddess, right? This is imagistic.
20 minutes.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Pete, you've got a little bit of a.
I'm not talking about what we're discussing here is the other saying of Parmenides that we discussed way back.
There's no question that there's some things in Parmenides which are formulas in words, right? Being and thinking are the same, right? Or in Heraclitus,
the strife issue, yeah.
Well, but the bow is called bios, but its work is death, right? Those sorts of things. Those are obviously just they're things on words. But again, when they're talking about in order to get people to be able to have the direct intellectual intuition, fundamental experiences themselves, the best of the pre-Socratics and the Socratics all are willing to treat truth questions as questions of intellectual intuition, insights, sights. They're not trying to have it be part of a syntactic system of signs, right? And I think that Heidegger himself would, be very much on the, semantic intentional side of things for how language works. I don't think that he is against this in general, right? There are people who want to reduce language to syntax. He's not one of them, right? The point that I'm making is instead that he is emphasizing here language as the medium in which meaning is captured. And I think he's correct about that. But how much is it captured? The answer is it depends upon whether or not the words succeed in conjuring back the memory of original experiences that the thinker uses their own intellectual intuition to undergo again, and uses their other capacities of attunement besides the words to arrive there. And it's clear to me that one has to do that to understand Heidegger himself, right? You have to be willing to try to recreate the experiences, not just of his own thinking, but of the thinkers he's trying to explain. Right, when he's trying to explain what the plane of lethe means to Plato here, right, the only way you're going to get it is if you can transport yourself to that experience and try to recreate it for yourself as much as you can. I'm not saying you can fully, but that's what's going to get you furthest. Okay. The reason I'm emphasizing this so much, though, is that the event of occlusion that he is describing, and which he sometimes, puts down to translation. I don't think it's just translation, because I think the problem's already there among the Greeks, let alone once you have a later language. But those events of occlusion, to me, it is pretty clear, arise from the absence of the original intellectual intuition actually being recovered, right? If you don't go back to the thinker of the past and try to think his thoughts, recover his thoughts, see the things that he saw, then just having his language and trying to have a sense of the poetry of them is not going to get you very far in preserving his insights or building upon them. Sorry, we're now getting very far into my own commentary on what's going on here, right? Rather than just explicating what Heidegger himself is saying. Okay.
Language has a life of its own, Jason. Language has a life of its own. It's also almost untied to the one who speaks it, the one who writes about it, the one who lives it. The language itself is the house of being. It's not necessarily tied. It's language that's the house of being, not tied to this or not tied to that.
I understand the claim, but what I'm saying is, when you're talking about these, the experiences and the insights on which something like a history of the history of truth as a changing thing, a changing set of understandings through history of the meaning of truth shifting from one time to another, those are not things which simply happen organically from the background evolution of language and how people use words. Most people's use of words do not influence that history. The people's whose use of words influence that history are philosophers, thinkers, a very few poets, right? And the way that they are speaking with one another and conveying the categories that everyone else winds up using, right, have this character of trying to reach the peak experiences of predecessors in order to understand them, appreciate them, and come up with their own next saying. So yes, there is an element of that which is historical, ongoing, organic, but it is not simply something which is coming in ambiently from the language. Plato did not think what he thought about the light metaphysics of the good in the Republic because Hesiod had the same thought in making Eris a daughter of night, right? That's not the way philosophical thought works, right? Plato is trying to capture what he can see in an original way there, and the things that he is looking at and doing that are not just in the language, they're also in the truths that he is looking at, independent of the language, outside of the language. You're not going to get a language model to do what Plato did in the Republic about the way in which the levels of truth are yoked together, or the thing understood and the understanding mind need the light between them, right? That is something which is not coming just from house of being words. It's coming from a human mind experiencing reality outside the words and trying to capture it in the words. That's my own take on it.
Unknowable, and impossible to know unless we have language. So what Plato may be doing exactly as you say, all these beautiful insights, but totally unknowable. They almost forgotten, as you say, oblivion. What's the use? No, we don't want to put use because then we bring in tools. No, but unknowable. I'm back to the language.
You can try to convey it to us by capturing it in language, But if you think that only the things which he can capture in the language and that everyone else can read off of it are the measure of either the thoughts, the history of the thoughts, or what's there in the language, this is selling the thinker very short.
No, but
and
not
it's
everyone can read off of it.
Exactly, right? It is
It's
rare.
the very few, very
Yes.
few.
Yes, and I'm trying to explain where that rarity comes from. What defines the rare that can read it is not that they read. It's not that they read words with a somewhat greater subtlety. It's that they are trying to look past the words, through the words, to the original insights, experiences that they are trying to reproduce themselves in their own intellectual intuition. Right? They are seeing the originals that the words are about. That is the way that the communication can actually be anchored. And it is the way that something like revealing of truth actually occurs. My claim. So I'm skeptical of the idea that truth in the meaningful sense only happens in language in the sense of in words. I don't think that's true. I think they need anchoring outside of the four walls of language alone, if you get me.
Language is the portal.
I'm sorry?
Language is the portal. P-O-R-T-A-L.
I heard you. I heard you. Okay. To me, language is a human habitation that is plugged into and assisted by an environing world that is bigger than language, and whose outer boundary is mystery, right? But language is not the outer mystery. Dan?
Yes, still on this is like, it seems to me like the Greeks are kind of very visual, and then we have the Hebrew kind of go to the word they are always, and then there was Pete, he mentioned now these days we think it's mathematics that express everything. So it's kind of I don't know, mathematics, we can say it's the word or the language, but it's something else. And we kind of move in between these three so far. And maybe and Heidegger is kind of trying to bring some poetics, it's kind of more like towards the language, but it's a tough one. It's
Fair. I mean, I would say that mathematics itself divides into the more visual that is geometry and the more language-like that is algebra, and we always blend them together. But there are language-like aspects of mathematics and there are visual-like aspects of mathematics. They blend, or they cross. I agree with you that the extra thing that you can get there poetically is the affective, and Heidegger, I think, is right to emphasize that. The visual version of the affective is the beautiful, and we'll hopefully discuss that a bit when we get to the origin of the work of art as our next topic. By the way, Isabel, you may not have heard, but the next session we're just going to be finishing this book. We'll be on just finishing our current book. I mean, I can't get it to show it there, and it will be on July the 6th. But then after that, about a month after that, we're going to be doing the origin of the work of art from basic writings. So we get to address the beautiful in that.
one more thing, when I'm curious what you think, like he's opposing there, he's saying the lethe is actually fundamentally opposes to physis. Like he thinks that those are the real opposites and kind of express is physis there visual or predominantly visual for the Greeks?
The fou in physis is light, it's faux. So yes, it's shining forth. It's only what grows because what blossoms forth, but it blossoms forth because it is the shining. So I think that the core truth words for the Greeks are all visual. They're theia, physis. I say all, almost all. Logos isn't. Logos is the one core Greek truth word which is not about the visual specifically.
And maybe that's why the New Testament attaches so much to logos and goes that way towards logos because it's kind of
It
it's
wants
not
to connect
so,
to the Hebrew.
yeah, to the Hebrew that is more
Yes.
the word.
Yes. I mean, there's multiple words for word. I'm sorry, someone has some background noise. I was going to say, there's multiple words for word, and even the Greek version of the Old Testament, let alone the New Testament. You get word. You also get a rama, which is like a breath, and you get a thing which is more like the spoken bit, the phone, the sound, right? So, you get something like voice, something like breath, and something like word as three different layers. But definitely of those, the logos level is one which is closest to language in the sense, anything like the sense we mean here. But it is fair to say that that tradition is much more focused on the language side of things and much less focused on the visual side of things. Although you can also find places in the in that tradition where sight is a more immediate or fuller conveyor of truth than words and hearing is. Now I see you with the eyes. I'm thinking in Job, right? But anyway, not wrong that there are these cross differences. Okay. Leaving aside ways in which Plato may have more in his favor than Heidegger is giving him here, he is already giving Plato a lot in his favor here, because the Plato he is presenting as the author of the plane of lethe myth is very far from someone who has replaced truth with a correspondence theory and is thereby, closed off access to original truth. There's no sign of that here, right? We also saw that in the Essence of Truth book when he, not the short essay, but the full book, where he was talking about the allegory of the cave and giving an interpretation of the allegory of the cave. In all these places where he's directly dealing with core Plato on truth, if I can put it that way, he is very far from finding that Plato is simply the originator of correspondence theory. Instead, you get this a nuanced mythos appreciation of truth as disclosure in Plato, even on Heidegger's own evidence. People may be tired of me breaking lances for Plato and reading Heidegger, but one of the reasons I harp on this much is not just because I like Plato, but because I think there are elements of Heidegger himself which are way more Platonic than most people think. And I don't mean in the content outcome, I mean in terms of the there's less, he may, even if he's trying to be anti-Platonist, he's not always succeeding at it as much as he thinks. Nietzsche is way more anti-Plato than Heidegger is from my reading. Okay. I realize we have not even gotten close to the what you would expect for the length of time here, but I want to talk about the three myths of the Republic for a second. How many people here are familiar with all three of the if I mention Ring of Gyges and the cave and the story of Ur, does everyone have clear images of what each of those things is about? Or some people here no idea what I'm talking about?
No idea for me,
Okay.
Jason, so I'm all ears.
Okay, so you probably know the story of Lord of the Rings, right? That you have a ring of invisibility that tends to corrupt people because it tempts them to power, right? What people don't realize is, well, very few people realize that the original of that story goes back to the Greeks. It's a story that we find in Herodotus of the ring of the ancestor of Gyges. So Gyges is a minor king in some place in Asia Minor, like Lydia or something. And he has his ancestor had a magic ring that when you turned it around made you invisible. And this story is told early in the Republic, beginning of book 2 of the Republic. And what is the moral of this? Not moral. Where does it go? From having the ability to be invisible, this ancestor of Gyges uses it to seduce the queen, murder the king, and take over the kingdom. Right? He uses it to commit injustice with impunity. So the idea that invisibility confers upon someone the ability to commit injustice with impunity, and this is a path to power, is what's encapsulated in this myth of the magic ring. You get that, by the way, in Wagner's Ring Cycle. You get that in Tolkien. There's many different things later which play on this very old Greek story. In the Republic, this is used to kick off the question of, is it better to be just even if you have the reputation for being unjust, or to be unjust if you can have the reputation for justice? To be unjust while having the reputation for justice is the analog of invisibility. You can fool people into thinking that you're just while behaving unjustly behind the scenes. And this is what the cynics counsel, and this is what the teachers of tyranny counsel as the best way. They present justice as being a mean that is only choice-worthy if you can't get away with this, where people know that it is worse to suffer injustice than it is good to do it. So they decide to compromise on either having injustice done to them or doing it to anyone else, but only because they don't think they can get away with it. And the test of the ring is, would you be just if you had impunity? And that test of the ring of would you be just if you had impunity, would you be just if you were invisible, is the same thing you get in the stories down to Tolkien. Okay, so the point is, the first myth about a difference between truth and visibility, or truth and appearance in the Republic, is the story of the Ring of Gyges, and it is setting the question of whether or not justice is choice-worthy for its own sake. And this is the challenge that the young people in the Republic give to Socrates. Young people, I mean Glaucon and Adeimantus. They want Socrates to convince them that even if they had the power to get away with injustice, they should not try to be unjust. Okay, that's the drama that kicks off the whole dialogue. It's the inciting incident, so to speak. And the point to notice about this is that this is a myth about what to make of truth versus appearance, right? Does the ability to appear as what you are not, to be pseudos, confer a power that is more choice-worthy than the truth itself? That's what the story offers or puts out as the possible seduction of power, or something like that. And the whole course of the dialogue is Socrates trying to convince the young people that they should be just anyway. They should be just in the face of such temptation. They should not choose the pseudos life, right? The second main myth is the allegory of the cave.
If I can say something on this,
please,
I think it's very interesting that I think, for example, Hannah Arendt is making a lot of point, like building the new politics in this kind of visibility. Show yourself, like you said. I think it's some modern and postmodern took it as a new way to approach the political.
Yes, about whether or not things are out in the open, whether or not things are disclosed, whether or not things are avoiding the hidden. There was a what was the at the time of the end of World War I, when they're having all the peace treaties, what was it? Open covenants openly arrived at, right? They didn't want any secret diplomacy, because secret diplomacy was the origin of evil, right? Whereas only what could be publicly defended when it was disclosed was, deserving of actually being enacted, something like that.
And more than that, putting like showing your body, like participating with your body, show your body, show your voice, something like that. It's not just like as a person.
That's a later thing you get in some of the postmodernists, for sure. But the exposure, right? Something like that, and authenticity is being willing to put oneself on the line, or something like that. But all of this are about there is a suspicion of the merely apparent as a way in which evil manages to disguise itself and pass, so to speak. and that understanding the political requires being alive to that possibility and is founded on one's reaction to that possibility, something like that. That is, the different reactions to politics. Anyway, the second big myth of the Republic is the allegory of the cave, right? Which most people know. It's the idea that naturally people are constrained to view only shadows of artifacts cast on a wall, and only if they are only if they have a complete reorientation, completely turned around and dragged up into the light, will they see the way that things actually are. The way that things actually are, beyond convention, beyond shadows of artifacts, beyond meanings of words. To see the things themselves is to ascend to something like the light of the eternal, or the light of the true, and to penetrate past appearances of things. And this is put together with the idea that, and that is in the dialogue, with the idea that it is the commands of the city and the commands of the political multitude that in most cities, in present cities, which are not ruled by good people, this is just taken as given, that is the main occluding thing, the main thing pulling wool over people's eyes, so to speak, right? So there is a notion that in order to get to truth as opposed to seeming, one has to be able to break free from the convention, the political, what the city demands, something like that. And when I say demands, I mean demands that its subjects believe, especially. That's the beginning. That's the middle. The end is the story of the one we're talking about here, the myth of So this is the warrior who dies and is about to be cremated on the bonfire, and he wakes up and he says he's been to Hades and he's come back with this because he was let go to come back with the story of what things are like over there, right? And that is why he can tell you, what happens in the plane of lethe, and but this sets up on the plane of lethe that people are to choose their next life, the kind of life that they want to lead next. Before all of the forgetting of being submerged in that life, they are to choose a next life. And those who are unwise choose unwisely, and those who are wise choose wisely as to what their next life will be. The person who has participated in a stable regime but without philosophy chooses for his next life the greatest tyranny, because he thinks of all the things that political life aims at as being the good, and this means he lacks the restraint that philosophy could give him. Wily Odysseus, on the other hand, chooses a private life that will commit no injustice. So there's this contrast of the choices that were laid out at the beginning of the dialogue being reflected in the afterlife on the plane of And there's a whole, additional thing around all that. The point that I'm making is that this unseen path place that forms that Heidegger is describing here also fits into the overarching story, the mythos of the Republic as a whole, right? It is where where one gets to act on the lessons that you have learned or failed to learn from the dialogue before then as to the choiceworthiness or non-choiceworthiness of justice, right? It is also a place where, injustice has its just desserts, so to speak. There's one other thing I wanted to talk about in the lethe image, though, which is the water of lethe that they must drink and that causes forgetting cannot be contained in containers. Does anyone know why the water of lethe cannot be contained? To me, the symbolism involved in this is pretty obvious at the level of the myth, but Heidegger did not explain it. So he mentioned it, but he didn't explain why the water of lethe would be something that could not be contained. Anyone have a thought on that? Is there anything else that flows and you cannot stop it from flowing that brings about forgetting and passing away?
Well, is it time? And also, yeah,
Yes,
you
it's
cannot.
time.
it goes back to you cannot manipulate it, you cannot grasp it, and probably goes also back
Yes,
to the ontological difference. It's not a being; it's something else. It's
correct.
yeah. That
It is time. It is clearly time. The waters of lethe that make one forget when pass through them, that always flow and cannot be stopped flowing. This is a poetic. This is another place that time comes into the Greek understanding, so to speak. It is also at the end of one's time, or before rebirth, but at the end of one's time. But yes, the ever-flowing waters of lethe that cannot be stopped, that cannot be held. You cannot stop the flowing of time. You cannot stop the flowing of life towards the unseen path, right? That is an attitude towards time and an attitude towards what Heidegger would call being towards death that you get in the Greek understanding and the Greek myth here. Anyway, correctly spotted, Dan. When a person who wrote a book called Being in Time comes upon a place where the Greeks are talking mystically about time and doesn't mention to you that it is time that they're talking about, I feel a need to point it out. It is time that is the ever-flowing waters of lethe. Okay. I realize we've only gone 2.5 hours, but I've gotten through the things I wanted to get through. I give everybody else a chance to.
yeah. Going back to this lethe business, is it his? How about the nothingness, like in Heidegger? That's also very important, and it's kind of it's part of being, but it's kind of opposing being, and is lethe also kind of the equivalent or similar in a way, or some dimension that where it's the same as nothingness, lethe nothingness vis-a-vis being, and
Yeah, it's fair. It's a fair question. I mean, there's in the original Greek understanding of arising out of and flowing back into, there is a prior notion of chaos or chasm, which is just the yawning, just the opening, and that's closer to nothing or nothingness in the Greek mythological conception, right? In the Hesiod conception. I don't think that lethe is performing quite the same role here. There is a mention in the actual myth of two chasms, which are the two ways that one can go in the afterlife, the left hand and the right hand path, as they came to be known, and one of which you have to go around for 1,000 years. But those chasms are not the underlying chasm of nothingness from which physis is emerging into the light. So Plato is not using it at the surface level of the conscious myth as a stand-in for nothingness. But that doesn't mean that the original Greek conception of night and day, light and dark, seen and unseen, being and non-being, right? They definitely did have some sense of that. And in that sense, the concealment would be, it's not quite that it's certainly an unbeing. Not necessarily a non-being, but it's more like an unbeing.
yeah, and also something else, like while reading that section of lethe, like with all those gloomy descriptions, like also reminded me, like when you read the other book on Heidegger is mentioning like Nietzsche's wasteland. And that's kind of like it's a reference to modernity and to what's happening these days. Is like it's not
where
just
nothing grows.
yeah, nothing grows, and it's kind of the modernity. It's nothing grows anymore. It's just artifacts, and the light is it's artificial light, and
This is fair. I mean, so in the section on mythos and oblivion, Heidegger was definitely saying that there's something like a falling away from the possible experience of mythos, as a falling away from a possible experiencing of truth, is a kind of oblivion-like wandering in a truthless void, something like that, where the voidness of it is just that there's no truth encountered. Whatever is encountered doesn't quite rise to the level of truth. So in that sense, there is an attitude as of a world of flitting shades. The real Platonic analog to that, though, is not the plane of lethe; it's the cave. The cave is meant to be about that. When you're trapped in a conventional world that you such that you cannot break out to direct contact with truth, right? Plato has a spot in his whole mythology and his whole architecture, so to speak, for that experience that I think Plato is that Heidegger is describing as something like a collusion, but his Plato's explanation of that is the cave, not the plane of lethe. But is Heidegger playing with calling that a version of plane of lethe? Maybe.
Isn't for Heidegger like we are like later Heidegger, and there are some signs here that we are trapped in this technological world, that it's artificial and it's kind of the equivalent of cave in Plato and maybe the lethe.
It is. It is, but even in his essay on the cave, this is in essence in his interpretation of the cave, Heidegger was insisting that even those in the cave who are looking only in the shadows in the world still have some experience of these things as being their realm of truth, and they still are living in some version of truth. And the reason he was doing that is similar to the reason why he says that technology is a mode of revealing, right? He does not think that you're ever fully cut off from access to truth, whether you're in a Platonic cave or in technology, right? All of them, these are all modes of revealing. Dasein is always already in the truth. The truth can be misunderstood. The truth can be, parts of the truth can be occluded. Parts of the truth can be historically misinterpreted as to what they are. But there is always appearing to going on. There's always being talking to man, even if you think that man and being are not on speaking terms, so to speak. Man and being not being on speaking terms is something disclosed to man by being. Right. Great question, though.
Well, one more thing, we didn't discuss it, and I found it very interesting that it's about the gods. He started with the goddess, and then Heidegger is talking so much about the gods here and atheism and why the gods don't no longer show up to us, and I don't know, like
This,
yeah, it's the God aspects. He's talking a lot here, and he's connected to all this issue of lethe and aletheia, and
I think that when he's talking, he is definitely talking about the Greek gods, and he's trying to convey some sense of what the Greek gods were to the Greeks, and that's part of saying something like mythos as the telling word was, an orienting thing for them, and they experienced gods as the uncanny in the surface of things, not as moderns will think about retrospectively looking back what we imagine the Greek gods were, right? Which is flated over with all kinds of Christian interpretation, and then scientific anti-religious interpretation, and all sorts of things like that. And he is trying to bring out here that even a thinker, even a very rational thinker like Plato, has all of those nuanced experiences of the uncanny in the familiar, right? That a Holderlin would describe as senses for the divine, right? And there's no question that Heidegger is interested in reviving that one way or another. Sometimes it sounds like he's talking about the actual Greek gods. He mostly is just saying that we don't understand the Greek gods well enough to dismiss them, because they're too alien for us to know what we would be dismissing. But the problematic we saw in contributions of the decision about the possible return or permanent absconding of the gods as being a live issue for philosophy of the future, and relating this to Holderlin as being ahead of us on the path that philosophy is going down. It's all part of this same thing about removing the occlusion of mythos and reawakening some sense of what I was calling an enchanted world, right? In the contributions discussion, I mean. So that's how I read those things here. First, he's trying to just get the students to see how little they may understand about what how these things were felt to the Greeks, how much distance there is. But I think he also is trying to do that because he is he sees the disappearance of those senses, sentiments, attunements in the modern world as being part of the sunset or oblivion of truth. We're losing the attunements, those sorts of attunements to anything that can experience truth as something like revelation, right? The fact that Parmenides is giving his extremely philosophical poem as the result of what is conveyed to him by the goddess at the Temple of the Dawn, right, is a willingness to give respect to the revelation aspects of philosophical truth that modern philosophers would shy away from, and Heidegger says shy away from because they're being less honest about how it actually happens, not because they are so rational that that's not how it happens, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and going back to, you know, your polis, Greek polis, and why maybe Aletheia still happened there was maybe because the Greeks, the gods are still involved, while in Heidegger's time, like when he wrote this book, it was also, there was no more gods, no more tragedy. Well, in the old times, like the Greek times, there were gods and the tragedy still happened, and that made the lethe, Aletheia still happening there, but not later.
Yeah, I mean, you can ask yourself, you can see how much experience of Aletheia as essence of truth is still there in Plato, and you can ask yourself how much of any of that tragic or mythos background as something literally believed as opposed to just attunely felt was. And I think the conclusion would be that the truth contact does not depend upon that. I mean, Plato is not a very superstitious person, is what I'm trying to say, but he still has that attunement when it comes to what truth is. So I think they're separable. Go ahead.
Can it be said that the gods have not have disappeared, have not actually done that, but rather we have substituted the gods for certitude. Certitude is our God, so that anything that falls out of certitude, we do not even look at, we don't see. It must be certitude. And the fact that, well, go ahead, one thought at a time.
Yeah. So, I mean, by the time of someone like a Descartes, yes. By the time of someone like a Hegel, it's not even certitude anymore. It's the human, right? I mean, people will differ in their interpretations of left, right, Hegelianism, whatever, but pretty much you're getting a gods are a collective human projection view by Hegel, and if not Hegel, certainly by a Feuerbach after him, something like that. So it's not even certitude that has replaced it. It's our collective ideals have become our gods, and you know, not only consciously so, you know, deliberately so. By deliberately, I mean after deliberation, after consideration, understanding, and deliberation. That's what people like Hegel think that they are doing. In the case of someone like Descartes, he definitely has a place for not gods in any multitudinous Greek sense, but a god of truth, a god of the philosophers. But he thinks that if something is not an intelligible attribute, then it is not anything, right? Intelligibility and existence in principle coincide for Descartes. And that's not primarily about certainty. It's one of those things he thinks he knows by natural light, right? Something like that. And in that sense, Heidegger is right that mystery can only be a leftover, a residual, and a temporary thing for someone like Descartes. I wouldn't, for Descartes himself, say that that's because he has put certitude in the place of God, but he certainly has a God who is very mathematical and intelligible, if that makes sense.
Not in the place of God, but in the place of the gods.
Yes.
It seems that's what I want to say. Also
yes.
about Aletheia and you were talking about Plato and your love for him, and but it seems to me that it is the Roman interpretation of the Greeks and Plato that Heidegger is mostly bristles against, mostly. And I also wanted
Yeah,
to,
sorry, I'm going to
yeah,
slow
go
you down
ahead.
there. So, I mean, I mostly agree with that, but I don't even know how much of it's the Roman interpretation of the Greeks. I mean, I see. You're right that that's the way he's presenting it, especially in this book, right? And there's other places where he considers the Socratics as a falling off from the pre-Socratics, but here it's definitely the Romans that are in the ancient world that are falling off from the level of contact with Aletheia that was still maintained by even the Socratic Greeks. In other places, in some of the history of philosophy stuff you get in the Nietzsche lectures, for example, the fall off is even sharper among the moderns, right? So there's different stages or nuances of the history. There's a uniformity to the story, but there's differences in nuance as to where the breaks are sharpest or biggest. And here it's definitely about the Latin translation of the Greek terms, something like that. But if I look at the Greeks of even the time of the Socratics, I see already the variety that includes all the people that he would describe as Roman in their understanding of it. Thrasymachus is as much of a imperialist as any of the veritas versus falsum is bringing to a fall, and Protagoras is as much of a man the measure of all things person as a Cicero or something like that. So the point is that the things which he's describing specifically Roman are already there in seed in the Greeks, right? They're just not all of the Greeks, if that makes sense. Sorry, Isabel, do you want to go to your next?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, I didn't know if you were done, but
No, actually, no. There are two things but you see, I can't read my handwriting. Okay, here it is. About the polis, and you were talking about
yes,
that and the way Heidegger sees it, and you diverged a bit from that and saying that that's not
yes.
exactly how the Greek sees it. But I think that there may be some truth to this great difference between polis insofar as the Greeks, because if I can go to my second love, which is Dante, to them to be exiled, because to be exiled from the polis was an excruciating experience. It was an experience that you wouldn't wish on your worst enemy. It was a punishment that was unequal. And to us today, this makes no sense. But I think that Dante may have had an inkling of what the polis may have meant for the Greeks.
So I understand that to be deprived of the polis, if it's the center of your ability to participate in truth and being, would be excruciating. And you're right that there were Greeks who thought that way. They thought of exile as being rendered without the earth, homeless. And you're right that Dante records a similar attitude. But I have to point out to you a contrast between Socrates and Aristotle. Socrates was offered the possibility of going to exile in Thessaly to escape from the judgment of Athens. He had a famous dialogue with Crito where he, said, "What am I going to do in Thessaly?" basically, and stayed and was executed. Aristotle was charged on a very similar capital charge after the fall of Alexander, as having taught Alexander, who the Greeks thought of as having tyrannized over the Greek states. And so he also faced the possibility of execution or exile. He went to Thessaly and happily lived there and didn't worry about it. The point is that Aristotle did not have that same attitude toward the polis that even Socrates still did, in part because he was a post-political man, if you get me. And I say post-political, not in the sense he didn't care about politics. He obviously wrote books on politics and ethics and was the teacher of Alexander, right, which are intensely political all the way around. But he did not tie his connection to truth to the city of Athens, right? His connection to truth was outside of anything the city of Athens could touch. And that transition happens, in the time of the Socratics, it seems to me. The point is there's a critique of the polis that happens in the Socratics. And that critique is the polis is not everything. And it's not just the Socratics that do it. You get into Thucydides in his own way as well, right? But this is also, there's lots of people that relate this to the whole axial age idea, that it's not just in Greece that one sees this, but the experience of oneself as citizen of the cosmos, not just a citizen of one city, is something you find across the whole ecumen in this period, like a few hundred years before to a few hundred years after, spanning and including this time in Athens and Greek philosophy. And the downweighing of the importance of the specifically political is one of the, I would put it, one of the civilizational accomplishments of that era, in my opinion. And what I'm seeing here is that when Heidegger is talking about the polis is the pole around which everything revolves, and where the site where truth is revealed. This is an inflation of the role of the polis that the anti-heroes and villains of Antigone would, or the Republic for that matter, would perfectly fit in. But neither Sophocles in the Antigone nor Plato in the Republic are partisans, or Thucydides in his history are partisans of that view. They are all critics of that view.
Thank you. And just one final observation, and then that's the end for me. This way of looking at this early thinking of the Greeks, going into this beautiful poem of Parmenides, and could you make a comparison, or you might not say that it is a superimposition of that beginning he has called the first beginning, but don't you find there inklings of the other beginning of superimposed with that very, very first beginning? There's something about that, the way he talks about this first beginning that to me has had echoes in what the other beginning is, the awareness, total awareness of the unconcealedness, which we have lost. And that's it for me, and thank you.
So yes, he does want the other beginning to, in a way, learn from, mimic, and reach the height of the first beginning, and that's probably what you're detecting, right? There's a sense in which the longing for another beginning is an emulation of these achievements of Greek philosophy and the pre-Socratics and the peaks of the Socratics. In that sense, there's no question that another beginning would have to both echo in his accomplishment and retrieve some of the insights of the first beginning. Heidegger, however, is not, a Platonist or a Heraclitean, and he has his own place he's going to want to go with this, and he does not think that they were already there. He doesn't think he's simply engaged in a project of recovering of lost insights that are there in Heraclitus, for example. He thinks that his understanding of Dasein and of event are going further and are bringing out explicitly things which they left unthought, is the term he always uses for this. We'll get a little of this in the next section, because in the next section he's going to give a little bit more of his own read on this. One can ask how both distinct and how important the contributions are that Heidegger himself is making in that other beginning. To be fair to him, he's not simply making them, he's also calling for them, even if he can't make them. That is, it's a program, not a claimed accomplishment. He doesn't think that all the things that the other beginning would need to investigate, discover, unveil truth about are things that Heidegger has already found. If I were to put in a nutshell the things which he thinks that the originals did not get that he wants to make sure to capture in the other beginning, it would be the active, actual, event-like, in-time character of unveiling of truth. there is a definite tendency in the first beginning to see truth as the timeless, truth as the eternal, truth as the lasting in the sense of the transcending of time. There is a trying to rise above time in the first beginning that you get even in the Fluxus, like Heraclitus, and even more so in the Platos and the Parmenides. They're looking to secure truth beyond the ravages of time, something like that. And Heidegger wants to have a equally attentive focus to truth, even when that truth is something that happens only once, even when it is historical, even when it is unique, when it has this character of event, when it doesn't generalize and does not necessarily transcend time. The closest I think we get in our other traditions to that desire of Heidegger is when you think of things like sacred history. Events that happen once can be the most important things that have ever happened. You get that notion in the whole biblical tradition, right? And in a way, he's trying to put those two together. So in a way, he is searching for a concern with something like truth is unveiledness that does full justice to the unique, to the historically unique.
You very well said. I agree with you. I might even say that Aletheia is unveiledness is Heidegger's translation of Aletheia.
Partly, I think he wants unveiledness to be something which the accent on the actual and once that he finds missing in Aletheia is what he's trying to add by calling it event. Okay, these are great questions. I must say that the questions and comments that people have definitely raise the level of what I'm able to get to in these discussions, and I just want to thank everyone for really being extremely insightful and helpful at raising the level of what we're actually able to get at here. It's wonderful to have you guys, and thanks. Okay, just very briefly for everybody, in case they were here later, next time is July the 6th, the rest of the book. And for after that, if you're looking for books to get, it's just going to be basic writings, because we're going to be doing the origin of the work of art next. Thanks everyone for coming.
Thank you.